Hi YouTube, welcome to another edition of HorrorHands, and for this video I'm going to be talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I revisited this film the other night. It's been a while since I've watched it, and I'm really glad I did because I really enjoyed it, and I'd forgotten how good and how well made of a film it was. This has always been a film that I've never actually regarded all that highly. I've always appreciated it as a good film, but I've never held it as a top tier horror film. And I think that goes back to being a kid, because as a kid I really loved horror films. And this movie was banned in the UK up until the late 90s when it was released on VHS. And growing up I was always aware of this film, but in title only, because you couldn't get it, so it was almost like a mythical film. It was just something that you heard about as being like the most extreme film out there because it was banned and you couldn't get it. And I was young at the time, so I'd not discovered more extreme things like Cannibal Holocaust and Faces of Death, things like that. Texas Chainsaw Massacre was really like the film to get, but you just couldn't. And I remember in the late 90s it was released on VHS, and my dad actually got me a copy of it on video. It was this copy right here, and he got it from a guy off a building site or something, so it didn't even come from like a nice video shop. He got it me from someone he knew. And I remember watching it and being a little bit disappointed with it. When I was I'd have been about 12, 13 years old, so all I wanted back then was like blood and guts and creatures jumping out and things like that. So something like Demons, for example, I absolutely loved it because you just put it on and it was just crazy. Whereas the Texas Chainsaw Massacre I felt was very low on blood and guts and things like that. So as a young kid, it didn't quite do it for me, and that was my first impression of the film, and that's kind of how I've regarded it over the years. But rewatching it, I grow to like it more and more. And I think although it is low on blood and guts, what it does expertly is create a sense of sheer terror that very few films can rival. And I think as a kid, my underdeveloped taste and knowledge in films didn't quite pick that up, and I didn't have that appreciation for filmmaking and what goes into creating a film like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think this film works so well because of two main things. The first is the acting. I've seen a lot of low budget horror films and the acting is quite often really not that good, and it doesn't ruin it for me, but it's just kind of to be expected now that the acting just is not there for a lot of low budget horror films. Whereas the acting in Texas Chainsaw Massacre is really good. It's not Oscar winning acting, there's no sort of powerhouse performances, but the people in it, they just act in a realistic way. And that could just be having a conversation with somebody in the car to reacting to the most awful things that you can come across. It's very convincing, and I think that really helps in its realism and its effectiveness. The second thing that I think really works for this film is the set and the look of the film. So it takes place in the house and in like the barn, and it's decorated and designed with some, like, at times real life skin and bones and decomposing things. It's really unpleasant, and it really comes across. There were stories of the cast and crew throwing up while the film was being made because the smell and the surroundings were so unpleasant. And it really does create this realistic look that this house really is occupied by some homicidal maniacs, and it just works so well. And I think the lack of blood and guts and the atmosphere and that feeling of dread just make it such a powerful film. I still think that I will never really fully appreciate the power of this film. I think to do that, one had to have put oneself in a cinema back in 1974 and see this for the first time. And I can only imagine what an endurance it must have been, because, you know, like for the scenes when she's like tied up and screaming in the chair, it really is like, God, how long is this going to go on for? So it must have been an experience and a half for a 70s audience to see this film. But like I say, I'm glad I rewatched it. It's a film that for me gets better and better as the more times I watch it, which is a great thing, to be able to watch a film and see more value in it as time goes on. I don't particularly like the sequels, because I feel that every sequel and every remake that's come out since this movie is very much a studio film, and it's got proper locations and proper sets and lighting and props, and that kind of doesn't do the films any favours, because this one is like, it just looks like the real deal. It really is quite a unique looking film. So again, that's something else that works in its favour. It's interesting to note as well that when this movie came out in England, it was banned, and over the 80s and 90s, the distributors were continually trying to get it released on video, and they kept taking it to the British censors, who kept saying, and it's one of the few examples where I can kind of see where the censors are coming from, but they would say that they would try to cut things out of the film, but that really wasn't the problem. It was the sheer sense of terrorization. I'm not sure if that's a word. It's a HorrorHands word. So yeah, the sheer terrorization that went on in the movie was just what they deemed too much for the audience. Nothing specifically in terms of blood and guts and violence, and that kind of gives you an idea of the feeling that this film creates. So yeah, like I say, I rewatched it and really enjoyed it. I think this is definitely the best in the series. None of the others come close to being such an effective horror film as what this first one does. So yeah, really enjoyed watching it again. So let me know what you think of this film. I'd love to know your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.